Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm Caitlin. I'm one of the locally optimistic admins, and I wrote the post that we're going to talk about today. I also lead a data team at Trove Recommerce, which is a platform that allows large brands and retailers to own their resale experience, take back items from customers and resell it. So we do a bunch of interesting data work around like single SKUs and fun stuff like that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from as we go into that. And since this is a small group, we'll take some time and go around and let everybody introduce yourselves and tell me kind of about your team and where you're coming from. Katie, you're the first person on my screen, so I'm going to throw it to you.
All right. I'm Katie. I'm a data science manager at Reddit. And we have a couple different data science teams at Reddit. My team is loosely organized around engagement on the site and like the core product. So we work with all sorts of folks, product managers, community managers. Yeah, I don't know. We definitely deal with like a lot of like, there's just like baseline foundational work that seems kind of proficiency based, but there's also just a lot of potential for creativity, and I'm interested in getting my team to do more of that kind of thing. So this article was pretty resonant for me.
Awesome. Carlos, I'm going to throw it to you. You're next on my screen.
I never know, are the screens the same order for everybody? I don't really know. So can you guys hear me? Okay. So I used to run a data team at Flatiron Health. So that data team was building data products in healthcare and oncology, and for both healthcare providers and for researchers in oncology. I left about a year ago to try to start a company that sort of tries to facilitate a sort of creative workflow in data science teams. So I managed that team for 5 years, and it took a lot of effort to try to get the team to be able to do some of the creative types of work. So definitely interested in the conversation, and thank you for writing the post.
Awesome. Andrew, how about you?
Sure. I'm Andrew. I'm an analytics engineer at Fishon Analytics. We help people get set up with DBT, kind of bring their workflows out of sparse, scattered everywhere data workflows into some more streamlined data products. I think core to our principles is moving away from data as a service into more like data as products. I don't know if that's the right way we say it, somewhere around those lines. And so I think your post, Caitlin, about proficiency and creativity really speaks to that, of like, how do you get people out of just being data monkeys and like, but balance it with like not running a school of children with like no proper output.
Awesome. Fatima?
Sure. So my name is Fatima. I'm events manager also from Fishtown Analytics, makers of DBT. So I'm more of here from the events side. So a lot of the people who I'm going to be creating events for are data analysts or software engineers coming from that place. So one of my coworkers shared your article with me, and I found it interesting. So I figured I'd check it out.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Kasim?
Yeah, hi, I'm Coffin. I run data at an e-commerce company called Bowl and Branch. I'm interested because like a lot of like, I mean, I bounce around in terms of like leading data teams and like consulting and whatnot. And I've always been like a balance of doing like wanting to do more creative work, and always like also like early stages companies really want you to do like, I guess the quote unquote highly like high ROI, low hanging fruit type of work, which isn't really the most fun, but it is what it is.
Awesome. And Patrick?
Everyone, I'm Patrick. I'm the co-founder of Iteratively. We help teams reliably instrument and capture data they trust. Previous to that, though, I was on the growth team at Atlassian, so a bit of a data nerd myself.
Cool. So it sounds like most of you read the article, so I won't spend a ton of time going through it, but kind of where I came from when I wrote this was that I've worked on and managed data teams for a long time now. I've worked on some teams that were very focused on repeatable processes and fitting everything into a little box, having very strict requirements before you start any work. And at times it does sort of feel like a data mill. Like we just need to take input, create output, and there's no room for deviation. And that is certainly not an environment I excel in. I've also worked on, and to be totally fair, managed data teams that were very loosey-goosey and didn't really have the processes in place to avoid some really obvious pitfalls, like sending out incorrect data occasionally, things that break all the time, kind of all of those things that create more work down the road because you didn't put the effort in up front. And as I've managed teams for longer, I've really spent a lot of time thinking about how you kind of create that balance where you don't make the job boring, but you do make sure that your processes are repeatable, that the quality is high, that people, you know, can actually depend on the things that come out of your team, because no insight is valuable if people don't trust it and actually act on it. And so I found this kind of framing of proficiency and creativity cultures to be really helpful in starting to think about how to build a culture that's actually neither one of those, but brings the best of both together. So one of the things that I would love to know is just kind of, as you look at your teams or teams that you've worked on or managed, like what percentage of your team's time do you actually think is dedicated to work that you would consider sort of on the creative side? And what do you wish that number was? I work in a really early stage startup, so we are definitely in that like low hanging fruit phase. So the number is pretty low for my team, and I definitely wish it was sort of 2 or 3 times what it is. It's probably like, I don't know, 25% right now. And I definitely wish that that was a lot higher, but I would love to hear from some of you who have more established teams or have worked on kind of at different company stages, what that looks like for you and kind of what you think the ideal would be.
I mean, I'll speak. I have I guess also, as I mentioned, low hanging fruit period. So like right now it's kind of difficult. I would say it's like probably like maybe 15%, which is not ideal of like a creative balance. Again, I would hope it was a multiple of that, but it is what it is right now, and it's like trying to, and it's a combination of trying to manage like timelines for existing like external stakeholder projects versus like building in time for like internal creativity, which is still a work in progress.
Yeah, I'll say that I'm in sort of a weird position where the team that I manage ends up having multiple different customers, which are just different product teams. And they're all in different like phases of their life cycle, where like some of them are like brand new and they need more foundational work. Other ones, like they're a bit more mature and they need a bit more creative work. I still think we should be doing more creative stuff in every circumstance, but I also think it's not necessarily mutually exclusive. Like a lot of the like proficiency based work, I think, if that's just like straight up reporting type things, sometimes I think people perceive it as like a zero sum thing where like you can only be just directly answering the question of the person who asked for an analysis or a report or something, when you can actually use that as a way of getting better in touch with your customers' needs and understanding what they're going to ask for next and finding ways to proactively provide that to them. And as much as I say that to my team, they don't necessarily always internalize it. but that's sort of where I'm coming from anyway.
Yeah,
I think that's a great call out. And oh, sorry. And I think it's also around kind of how you frame the outputs of those when you're like building a dashboard or whatever. Like it can be really boring, but sometimes even just taking half an hour when you're finished with it to like pull out 6 insights and send them not just to the person who asked for the thing, but to like a broader group of people who are interested, that sort of spurs conversations and kind of disseminates the work that you've done in a way that does get to sort of those insight moments a little bit, if not, you know, a broad open-ended discovery project.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have a little bit of lag, so I'm just going to jump in and see where it works. But I totally agree with that. Like, if you just ask why and have folks understand why they're doing something, it usually just makes it more fun anyways, and they can get a little bit more creative with it. Like, and it's very rare that you have like this perfectly scoped little nugget of a question. They know exactly how it should be framed. And like folks that sort of take that at its word, like end up having to sort of rework over time, or maybe that analysis gets thrown out. If you take the time to just like, even, it might not even actually in every single project, like end up getting a much better output, it at least for the right type of person on the data team, will at least improve their quality of life if they go and get to meet the person and understand the motivations and understand the business and understand the requirements and just toss around some ideas with them, work on the project. They'll probably, like, I would say over half the time will actually improve the scope of the project by doing that. And that gets them a little bit more into a creative mindset. But just to answer the original question, like by the end, it sort of like depends. I think Katie's point that it like sort of depends on the life cycle is really important. I remember throughout the 5 years, there was times where we were 100%, every single person on the team, like 10 people, just like all hands on deck, trying to like set up our data warehouse for the first time and organize a bunch of data. And we knew like the business value of that. So it was creative in a way, we were all on board with it, but it was also just like tons of pipelines and QAing. And then by the end, we were like doing more feature exploration in various areas and like got to more of a 50-50 blend of like, you know, folks found out that these people are pretty useful in like coming up with new ideas and figuring out new products and things like that. So got to a good balance by the end, but there was some brutal months in there for sure.
I wanted to jump on what Carlos said. Oh, sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, I definitely value the why. Like explaining the why definitely makes a lot of sense. I feel like we're very much in execution phase, so a lot of the stuff that we're doing that's exploratory is mostly research based, specifically just understanding the market. But what I found to work really, really well with the current team that I'm on, which is about 6 people, is actually following through. So like when somebody asks a question, it's like, okay, great. Like even if we don't have the data, it's like remembering to follow up with them in 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whenever it is, to actually provide them some insight, and then trying to make that transparent. So we have like a shared Slack channel where most of these learnings go into. And so then it like also becomes more generative at that point. Cause like you share something and then somebody will like pile on and they'll ask another question and then like kind of goes down the rabbit hole a bit, which gets folks to think in the terms of data to begin with. And like, what are the more outcomes that like, for us, we're doing a lot of feature work. So like, what are the outcomes of the feature work that we're trying to actually derive, and actually making sure that those features actually deliver the value has been super beneficial.
Yeah, I was just about to add like the whole why thing. I think the interesting bit is like when you start doing this low hanging fruit work, you start to very early realize that there's like millions of low hanging fruit that like it's just packaged. And it also like it comes into play where like if you build some foundational stuff, it unlocks a new set of new low hanging fruit where like the target's just constantly moving. What we've found to work previously at a place where I used to work was we would like once we got a couple good pieces of work out and got the trust of whoever the manager was, like if you're reporting to a new team, and then you build trust, you build rapport by building a couple of reports and like all the things they need. At a certain point, you can draw the line and say, you come to us with the problem, but don't give us the solution. Because often the scope of like what your data problem is, I think what Carlos mentioned was like, once you start asking the whys, you get to like broaden out the scope and actually build something that's a lot more robust. That tends to like be a bit better if you can tell your stakeholder, like we will sync up on what the problem is, but let us come to you with the solution. Because then it opens up like the realm of what I can figure out online. Like you give yourself a bit of leeway too to search like what other teams have built and then bring it to the table versus like them having like 9 times out of 10, a dashboard or a new, like maybe a reporting system will work fine with them, or like, God forbid, an Excel sheet that gets sent to them every week.
Yeah,
I think flipping it around might work. Sorry.
Oh no, finish your thought, please.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay. One thing that I've found interesting in the conversation or the context of conversations like this is to specifically position analytics work as being like design. Like you would never give a designer a really specific request of like, I need this to be like size 12 font, and like you wouldn't do that. Like you wouldn't do that to an analyst either, because the work is creative. Like say the outcome that you want to have happen, and the analyst is responsible for figuring out how you get there.
It's funny because as a recovering designer myself, it's you'd be surprised at how many times you have somebody over your shoulder pixel pushing the mock-ups. But yeah, it's not a great environment to be in as a designer.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful way to frame it. It's funny, I was looking back through old tickets for my team. Somebody had said, I think we created a ticket for this like 6 months ago. And literally we had something where someone had sent an Excel mock-up of a report that was like, I need this row, this row, this row, this row. It had one metric on it. Like they could have just said, I need to know how many email signups we have every month. And instead they were like, I need it to look exactly like this. I need it to have these filters. Like this is the thing I need. Because that's how, before I joined, my team actually worked, and like some of the work was offshored. Requirements had to be really, really strict. And so the team was just so not adding value. And like we're really pigeonholed into, this is the report developer, and you take her a fully fleshed out report and you kind of give it to them. And this culture change getting to analytics is your partner. It's a design problem, not a build. It's such a hard culture change. I would love any other suggestions that folks have for kind of building that culture of partnership and understanding sort of the differences. We spend a lot of time saying like, analytics is like engineering. We need these processes, but it's also really not like engineering. And kind of how do you communicate that balance of like, it's open-ended, but we have rules. We want the data to be right, but.
I was actually going to draw a comparison to engineering here, because I think a lot of it actually is in hiring, because there probably are a lot of data people who are like, give me the requirements and like just want to know the requirements. And I only bring up engineering because I had this frustration seeing a company grow from 10 people to 1,000 people, where at the beginning, people are just like, I don't want the requirements, like just let me roam and do everything and be really creative. It's like, man, this product manager doesn't know how to scope out projects well enough at all, and like wants a very tight requirement. So like you get sort of both ends of the spectrum, and there's probably different types of cultures that can facilitate both of those. But I think it comes down to hiring. Like if you hire for people and like interview them in a way that makes them demonstrate that they're like open-ended and creative problem solvers, and then you sort of like promote people on that, then you're going to facilitate that culture. But if you sort of give people interviews that are sort of like, here's a set of inputs, can you get to the right output? And then, you know, give people raises and promotions based on that. I mean, ultimately culture is defined by who you hire and who you promote, is my philosophy, at least.
Yeah. One thing that I also notice, like based on like who you've hired, is like some people just like don't really know what analytics is capable of. Like they've only ever worked with like a very narrowly defined business analytics role or something. So they they just like don't know like the power of like analytics in explaining a user story or something. Like the storytelling piece of it is really important. And like you can't just like suddenly drop a gigantic like amazing analysis on someone who's not prepared for it. Like sometimes as a manager of an analytics team, I feel like my job is almost to be like a sommelier of just like, I need to like gradually elevate their taste over time. Like I'm not going to give them like a really expensive, nice wine if they won't be able to appreciate it because they just don't have any context for it. So it's like, it's working your way up. One of the most successful things I've done in my role, and like it's so silly, but I created a regular all hands segment that we called Data Tots. That it's just like a bite-sized data snack of just like, this is a fact that you should know, and no one's going to ask us for this, but we think you should know it. And it has been remarkable, like how much it's actually changed the way people think about what the team can do. It's not just a like, you need data, you need a report. It's been a thing that's made people think differently about what the team can do and what kind of perspective we can bring to the table. We're still not where we need to be, but
that's awesome. What are some examples of what you all have shared there that's been like really well received?
Yeah, well, like one thing that like for my team we work with is moderation on the site. For those of you who aren't familiar, actually, I'm assuming most of you are familiar with the Reddit product, but like lots of different like forums basically within it, and like it's mostly managed by a volunteer moderator. And depending on how big each individual community on the site is, the moderation teams are different sizes. One of the best facts that we did for an all hands segment was to just talk about like based on the size of the community, how big does a moderation team need to be? And it just like gave people an appreciation for how much work it actually is to manage a community on the site. And it made people think differently about how we need to prioritize features and build a product.
That's super cool. We did something kind of similar at my last job as well. That was like the data team was from 0 to 1. Of like when data used to just be a software engineering side gig of like you send them a ticket and they give you numbers. Then when it went from 0 to 1 to like 6 eventually, we kind of needed to like walk the company into the realm of like there's numbers outside of this one unique use case you need. But the next thing we also did like paired with that is normally, I think this is like a traditional trend of like, as you invest more in data, you try to push more self-service stuff out. And honestly, half the time, some of the other low-hanging, less creative work can be solved by decent self-service. We would pair the data bites with like awards or like best like non-data member like ad hoc report, or like we would just find like cool queries that people have run, ask them to submit to the data team, and like, or if we pair on them, because usually we'd let them come during office hours, we'd pair on them on a problem that they're trying to solve. If we like it, we'd highlight them to like the general chat, just like lift them up. And then it gives them confidence to take on a lot of the easier, like quick wins, and it kind of takes it off the plate of the data team. I think that might be like a good pairing of like introduce them to new concepts and have people kind of own the rest of the stuff. You're still going to have them come to you to confirm the numbers, but it's better than having to build it from scratch sometimes.
Yeah, and with self-service tools, I find that it's helpful to frame it in a positive way. Like, oh, you can get this without any of like having to wait on us. We don't have to be a bottleneck to you. Like you can just go and do this all on your own and get results quickly. Like that is, people like that framing better than just like, we don't feel like doing your crap.
Your work is low leverage. You do that. We want to do high leverage things.
It was interesting.
Yeah, it's probably not a winning communication.
One of the things I observed while at Atlassian is we went from a company that didn't really care as much about analytics. Like we didn't have a dedicated function for it. It was primarily owned and managed by the growth team. And then over the course of 3 years, hiring the VP of data, growing the team from less than 10 to probably over 60 people at this point of dedicated analysts and data scientists within the organization. And that was being the hardest position for us to hire for, were to hire analysts and data scientists across every single role that we were hiring for. And the only way that I was actually able to dedicate time to it as an organization was to make that like the #1 priority of the company, is to grow it as a function, and to make sure that I was like up-leveled to the case of having a dedicated VP of data, similar to how we have a VP of engineering and a VP of design and a VP of product. I think that worked really, really well, but that took years to get right. And it's still like we went from an organization that had what was called like 3 in a box at a lot of companies, or a triad model where you had a PM, a designer, and an engineering manager all working together, to now where you have a quad where you have a PM, a designer, engineering manager, and an analyst or a data scientist who typically manages a team of analysts within a product. And that's helped a lot as well, because all of the conversations you have now have that lens and have that voice within the room when you're having a conversation related to the roadmap planning or go-to-market or any of the other types of functions that you'd have. And so I think that worked really well, but I think the only way that that happened was through executive buy-in. It wasn't a bottoms-up approach.
Yeah, I do find it really makes a difference to have executive buy-in to a data strategy. Otherwise, it's, I don't know, it's borrowing favors and a lot of just trying to force the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that I spent a lot of time thinking about while I was writing this, that I'm not sure I have solved yet, is how to frame failure productively and how to think about failure productively. Like, there's a point up to which failure is really positive and you're getting closer to new knowledge, and like it's a necessary part of the process. And then there's the point where a project has dragged on so long that you're starting to like lose buy-in from stakeholders, or it truly is just kind of a waste of time. When you give folks the leeway to work on a creative endeavor and go into something not knowing that whether or not it's going to work out or how it's going to end up, how do you help a team think about how to frame failure in a way that both opens doors but also doesn't leave them open forever?
We had sort of a solution, maybe not the best, at my last company. And so most of the company was driven by OKRs. And so a lot of our work was like spillover from OKRs of other teams, or objectives and key results for those who aren't familiar. But what our manager got to do was to kind of negotiate for our own data team OKRs. That's like independent from the company, obviously a much smaller chunk of like the larger bit of work, without any strong commitment to yielding any like concrete output. Like, we have to get buy-in from like the engineering manager, who at the time we were reporting under. So it was like the data manager reports to the engineering manager. We'd have to like prove the value, but it wasn't something that was like rooted in like another end goal that if it failed sets us back. But we would treat it more like an R&D sort of thing. And so it gets people to be a bit more creative. You still keep good checks and balances along the way, like maybe planning sessions and like go, no-go polls before like building anything. But it's also like an OKR specific to your data team that if you fail, you can be held accountable for, but doesn't really set you back as a company. And so it makes it a bit more comfortable for people to fail on it. That kind of worked. It kind of let us try new things, knowing that we might not be able to adopt this in like 2 months after. Like, yeah, we have a proof of concept and it breaks. And I think the second is splitting it out into like, what is a proof of concept and what's a full build? So like, can you build this proof of concept? If it works, then sweet, you move forward. I think usually failures tend to be when you try to bucket the two. It's like, you found this cool new technology, you want to try it out and implement it at the same time.
Yeah, I do like that. Scope creep is basically what you're getting at, and that's such a good way to manage it, is like do regular check-ins, like make sure that you actually do have an MVP that you're showing people and like getting feedback on, because if no one gives a crap about it, then there's no point in doing it. Like, that's how you avoid failure, is making sure there's actually a customer for the work.
Oh, also not tying promotions and everything to the success of that project. I think like moving away from outcome-based promotion and compensation to like skill-based, I think gave at least me a lot of job security, because it's like I can try experimenting things, but I know like my compensation and my job security is tied to skills I built, not necessarily an outcome of one tiny project that I wanted to hack around with.
Yeah, I think that is important for sure. Like we realized that engineering job ladders at one point had like a line in there about like has invented something new, or like had something about like sort of the like your output. And so like everybody just wanted to go own a little system and was like carving out their little fiefdoms. And it's like, that's a terrible way to incentivize people. So yeah, on the failure thing, I was trying to think of like, so I hate to be, this is like so Silicon Valley, like there are no failures, but I was trying to think of like real failures. And like, if you frame it as like, this is a thing we're trying to learn about. If the outcome is positive, maybe we'll grow the team, or it'll expand, or it'll turn into a real product or whatever. And if not, then present to everyone and we never have to fucking do that again. Great. Like, and so a lot of the best successes were things that didn't pan out, but were like awesome presentations of like the things we should never work on again. And like when you frame it like that, and I totally realize that that has a little bit too much of the tech euphoria bubble on it, but like that's honestly sort of our outlook on those types of projects. And it's a little bit, I worked at Amazon for a couple of years, and that was sort of how they framed things. It's like, oh, let's try this thing. It's scoped like this. This is the endpoint. If you get this amount of X or whatever, we're going to keep going and put more stuff into it. And if not, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to think about it, though, because like not every project has to last forever. Not every metric has to last forever. Like your business changes and some things become unnecessary after a certain point. And like if something's unnecessary, that's just a thing you don't have to do anymore. So honestly, that could be framed as a victory.
Yeah, actually, and somebody brought up the like prioritizing along the business lines. As much as possible, I just tried to treat data like everything else in the business. And like you experiment with data just like you experiment with new features or with new whatever. Like it's not any different. It should have the same sort of consequences. It should have the same sort of risks, and people should have a seat at the table to be able, so like incorporating it into OKRs, like just say like, this is an OKR, just like the engineering team is trying to do this. And we think it's going to help the business, and sort of just try to align it and put it on the same sort of footing as the rest of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the framing of celebrating that you're never going to do something again. Like I had one job where people kept bringing up the same project, and I kept having to trot out this presentation that was like, by the time I left, 2.5 years old. And I was like, no, we did that. We really tried. And there's very little chance that anything has changed in 2.5 years that is going to make the outcome different. Let's not do that again. But I don't think that I had the thought to actually frame that as like, no, we already did that project. It was a success in showing what we're not going to do. That's a really great way to frame it. And I think kind of related to this, there's sometimes pressure on data teams from the exec level that like new insights are an output. That like unknown knowledge, like we're not going to ask you the question, you just have to go bring us nuggets of gold, go pan for them. And we've seen that come up in the locally optimistic community several times, where people are like, how do you manage this expectation? I think it's somewhat similar to know that like you aren't always successful. This is experimental. We'll bring you things when we find them. We can't guarantee it. It's not, it's by its very nature, very open-ended. But has anyone here kind of dealt with that expectation, or have any feedback on kind of how to manage against that?
I mean, I've seen it before, and like the way I try to frame it is that one, we are like, I guess, like mentioned like digging for gold, but at the same time, like our net new insights aren't just us doing things on the other hand. Like if we're like, for example, if I'm helping a marketing team with coming up with a new product that has value to the business, that is like inherently data driven, like insights, yes, it came through marketing as opposed to like through us exclusively, but that's more or less just a function of us not having the resources to just spend all day doing whatever we want, as opposed to not bringing in value.
Yeah, I think just reminding people of like what you have done, even if it's like older, like I don't know, like there's a project my team did at the start of this quarter that like right when we were about to start it, we were like, okay, hang on, let's slow down for a second and build infrastructure so that we can do this scalably. And we slowed down, we built the infrastructure, and then like by the end of the quarter, now we're ahead of schedule on it. And like no one's going to remember that we slowed down to build that infrastructure on their own. So every time someone says something about the project, I always find ways to be like, well, isn't it a great thing that we spent that time to build the infrastructure and that we're ahead of schedule now? And like, I feel like a broken record sometimes, but I also don't really care because people are forgetful. And if I don't remind them, probably no one will.
Yeah, there's rarely such a thing as over communication in your work life.
Yeah, and I was also going to like, I think probably the style of my team is coming through a lot, but like the thought of just like having a nugget and that has value in and of itself just doesn't sound that appealing, at least the way that our data team was aligned. It's like, what would be appealing is like if there was, the outcome wasn't like a nugget, but like, oh, we found this and we think we should do something, and then hash it out with a data team or with a product manager or whatever, and that became a real project. And then you like, you know, try the hypothesis to vet out whether that nugget had some sort of actionability or whatever it was. Like the idea of like these magic metrics, you know, like which I've heard a lot and like asked for, which is like, why can't we get the Facebook if they have 7 friends thing, and we'll have that one nugget and it'll drive the whole company forever? And it's just like, that's not how it works. And like, maybe we find something interesting, like let's test it out and put something in the product, and the like actual product becomes part of the output and part of the project, instead of just like the data team being seen as some sort of fountain of like beautiful nuggets of information that can get like spill into the rest of the organization.
Yeah, it's also where I've found it helpful to really focus on kind of that partnership. Like our insights come from partnering with you. Like it's going to be adjacent. We're not going to like go off and find a whole new gold mine. We're going to be trying to build this road with you and find gold. And that sometimes works. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we just built the road we said we were going to build. That's fine too. So not to like take that metaphor to unnecessary extremes, but yeah, it really is. It's that Facebook metric. Painful. So we've talked a lot about the creativity side, because I think ultimately that's kind of what we all want to spend our time on. But what are some of the ways that you help sort of reinforce a culture of proficiency, and like making sure that folks are taking the time to, you know, review peer review work or, you know, QA things before they go out, and kind of building those feedback loops to improve the quality of the output, regardless of whether that was something they were interested in doing or not, but just making sure that you've kind of got those tent poles of quality and reliability on your team. Everyone is so excited about this question.
Maybe each of us does not want to be first.
Yeah.
I love how we all just have this sigh expression of just like,
It's not easy.
well, this is the problem we have to deal with.
This is
And I was
the
afraid, just
answer
like,
we
I
came
pause.
here for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is like when you see work happening, like just trying to think through like what are the failure conditions here? Like who's going to see this and like dig into it really deeply? Like, can you loop them in early? Like what, like, I don't know, like I'm thinking specifically, like if you're doing an analysis for like some stakeholder who's like very picky and always finds errors in data, like finding a way or like reminding the person on your team, first of all, to invite them to be a part of the analysis and being like, hey, you're really good at finding all the edge cases. Like, what do you think of this? Like there's reminding the person to do that, but also just like making sure they realize it is for their benefit. Like it's going to suck now or it's going to suck later. Whenever you see something like that, whether it's like you just need someone to spot check their query or someone's like give feedback on an analysis before it goes out more broadly. I don't know. I think like framing it in terms of like, this is the pain you will experience and this is how you can avoid it has worked well for me. But maybe that's
By
not
the
the
way,
most friendly.
This is like my favorite productivity hack, which some people are really, really not open to, but it's like, I call it show them shitty data, which is just like some people are like really want some data and you're like, okay, I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to you a little early and you're going to help. We're going to like develop this thing together. It's going to have tons of rough edges. And then they help you develop the right business rules or modeling assumptions. And then they're an expert on the data and they can answer questions about that data set. And usually that's the thing that the data team gets. So like, I totally agree with that, which is just like go to the pain in the neck sort of stakeholders who are usually just like honestly more analytically oriented and like can find all those edge cases and just like collaborate on it with them. And like, that's like ultimately the only path to good data quality is using it. Like you're not going to do it in a vacuum. The only way to make it better is using it. And so like the secondary hack on top of that is like building like data warehouses and data marts that have been used by tons of different use cases, because those are just going to be absurdly high quality as people use them over time. And then like when you develop something new, just like find it picky and like likes sort of picking data and just like collaborate them.
I have a potentially hot take on the, like, sometimes do you just have to wait for people to trip on their thing they broke? I'm not sure, like sometimes it's really hard to communicate, especially when you work in an analytics team that could be very wide. You have people who are like more engineering oriented and like, yeah, hiring's one good bit of it. Like if you could hire and lay your skill sets out well, and some teams are lucky enough to have like a good onboarding period where you can just hands-on get them up to speed. But I think a majority of the teams we've worked for and worked with have like a big mix of people who have never touched code.
It can be risky.
But yeah, I mean, that's also under the assumption that they're working on like smaller projects as they onboard and then like kind of let them trip. Yeah, it's kind of tricky. Trapped? I don't know.
Yeah,
I
mean, it's basically like at some point you need to push the birds out of the nest. They got to learn these lessons for themselves to really internalize them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the hardest things about management in general is like, I learned how to do things the hard way, but I don't want you to learn to do things the hard way. Like, I don't ever want to work in a culture where someone like brings me in on a Saturday to yell at me about a PowerPoint presentation. So like what's the least worst way that you can learn these lessons for yourself?
Yeah, sometimes it's like, I don't know, like sometimes I just tell people that you need to do this and like it's not a conversation. But then like once they've done it, like tell them why it was a good thing, remind them why it was a good thing. A couple weeks later when they're using like whatever like aggregate table they built in the warehouse, like remind them like, oh, isn't it a good thing that you did this? Isn't this so much easier now that you did this? Like it's annoying, but like Who cares? It's making their life better.
I've taken like the hybrid approach
Yeah,
with both Andrew and Katie. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, pretty much depending on how important the thing is. If it's worth letting fail, I'll let it fail. If it isn't, then I'll kind of enforce that and explain value adds both before, during, and after, and keep reminding them after until it gets ingrained.
That's probably a good way to segment it. Like, does it matter if they fail on this? Then it's okay to let them.
We had this analogy of like how low is the safety net? Like you never want somebody to hit the floor, but like you can like just get it lower where it's like, okay, like, you know, if they're presenting to the CEO, it's like you probably want that to be relatively safe. But like if they're just presenting to their peers or it's like presenting to the team, it's like, okay, like let them, like there's rooms for them to make mistakes and learn.
I think Ben Hurwitz says like, don't have your customers pay the tuition. So like, and internal customers, like external customers, let it be that like you will cause negative impact, but it's okay to fail. Just like don't have the customers pay the tuition.
Yeah, we try to take a similar sort of celebratory approach on like testing and anything automated. We're like, hey, we automated a thing that caught a mistake and we're going to tell everyone about it. Like, this was broken, but we fixed it before you even noticed. Aren't you excited? Nobody told us that this thing didn't run overnight, but we're telling you.
Yeah, that's so good.
Aren't you glad that we automated stuff?
That's so good because that work is invisible. Like that's a thing that I hear all the time, like both from infra teams and data teams, is like people only notice when something goes wrong. And that's when we hear from them about our work. But like making sure to proactively celebrate, like we saved you a bunch of trouble. Like maybe they don't care, but like they should still know.
Yeah. Or maybe somebody did care. Maybe somebody was looking at that thing and thought it might be broken, but didn't really want to bother us and didn't really care. And so it's also sort of like, no, you're not crazy. That was broken yesterday and no one told us, but it's fixed.
Yeah. Maybe I was overly negative. It's probably actually saving a lot of people a lot of time. So it seems like telling people about stuff is the coherent theme today.
Yeah. Celebrate all the wins. Celebrate often. Celebrate even when it's not interesting to anyone else.
And drag in your stakeholders in the process. It's usually like they only get it when they hit the same problem you hit, and they're like, oh yeah, that is really hard. Like, now I get why your job is difficult. And you're like, yeah, see, I told you this like 2 weeks ago, but I'm glad we're up to speed now. And then they become like your partner forever. And they like love you because like you give them answers. But it takes a while.
We talked a bit about like evangelizing the work and kind of sharing with stakeholders. Has anybody ever done like a monthly newsletter or like a summary recap of like what the team's working on or like some of the insights that have come from the data and shared that internally?
Yes, we just started doing this a couple months ago, and I will tell you the only way that we made it sustainable was one by enforcing a template for write-ups so that like there's just low cognitive load for analysts in sharing their work. And then the managers would get together and just like make a list of everything and plug that into a template. So templates are how you do it.
Yeah, pretty much the same. Like I try to line it up somewhat with sprints. For the most part, be like, oh, this is what we did in this sprint, and this is what we're hopefully going to do in the next sprint, and here are a bunch of links and whatnot, things like that.
Yeah, Jira also, like if anyone is in Jira, like there's a lot of like nice integrations you can do with like Google Sheets to just like generate a templated, like you copy and paste this and then like add a little narrative color. It automates a lot of the really annoying parts of doing a big summary like this.
Yeah, we do a manual monthly summary. We call them release notes. And it's really manual and really painful, and getting anyone else. It's so funny because you tell your team, like, this is something that people get excited about. Like, people find out about something that they didn't know you worked on, and then they like ask you a bunch of questions and they think that you're a superhero. Like, surely it's worth 10 minutes for you to think about what you've done in the past 30 days. Surely.
When you say it's manual,
hard.
when you say it's manual, what goes into it? Like, is it that they write up a summary of each like analysis and then plug it into something else, or?
I think it's, for them, it's really kind of deciding what makes the cut line, like what they actually want to put in there. It's like you can pull a list of everything, every task that you finished in the past month, but like, what do you want to share? Like, is it sort of company-wide interesting or not? Like, I think that people overthink that, and you know, they don't want to share a list of 25 things that they've done, because some of those were like, I spent 5 minutes pulling a different view of inventory over time for accounting. And some are like, I did this really cool, new, impactful thing. And when you pull kind of just a list of what you've completed, it can sometimes compress that difference in a not so helpful way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, I love the idea of sharing tidbits at all hands, but I've tried that before the past too, and it like really becomes a slog to pull out enough things
Right.
and not make work for that.
Yeah, I mean, we always try to like just do some like pull a fact that we found in the course of what we're doing, and like the bar is low. Like, part of why it's like it's a bite-sized thing is like it could literally just be like, oh, 10% of our traffic's in Canada. Isn't that interesting? Like, some of them are quite big, some of them are a little small, and I don't know, maybe the variance makes people pay attention more because they don't know quite what they're going to get.
We did this thing at Atlassian that I really liked called Story Time, and we literally, it cost like $400, but we literally printed like a wall size board of the entire customer journey, and then like added all the data points where there's basically tidbits. Like, each screen, it was like the entire customer journey, and each screen had a tidbit from either data science or analysis or experiments that we'd run. And so like, you had to walk by it every time you went into the office. Like, there was no way of escaping it. So it just forced people to like walk by it every single day. That was one of the ways that we kind of forced it down their throats, I guess, for lack of a better term.
That's really awesome. Awesome. Well, we're running up on time. Anybody have the solution that they've just been holding back? Like the silver bullet? Anyone have any burning questions? Anything like that?
I don't know. This is pretty helpful for me. I appreciate the discussion. It's always something that's fun to think about.
Same.
Yeah. Thanks for writing and organizing, and good to meet everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, everybody. It's been awesome.
See y'all.
Have a good one.
Bye.